No. Good afternoon and welcome to this is the ALD sponsored panel on the art and aesthetics of lighting design, and with us today my name is Imran. We have Lee Cranham, we have Peter Montford, and we have Jan Abdullah, all of whom are exhibiting downstairs. And we also have Scott Palmer, whose book might be still on sale. There are some copies left. His excellent new Reader in Light. Highly recommended. So, what we are here for today is to talk about the art and aesthetics of lighting design. There's been lots of sessions on how to do it. And that's not what we're talking about now. What we're talking about really is stage lighting design and art. And if so, why? Well, aesthetics can come in various different types and various different phrases about that. We've got things that we will be saying about that, but should we just talk for a minute or two about what each of you think counts as good lighting design in the context of theatre productions? Peter, would you like to?
Sure. Hello, everybody. It's always very hard. It's almost like saying, what's good art? It's an unanswerable question. It's not just a matter of what you're using or what it is as a material thing, but it's also a matter of taste. But I think what we're being asked to explain is kind of how does lighting design work at its best, and I think the very first thing that we have to take into consideration is that we're all involved, largely involved in theatre, and theatre is by its very nature a collaborative media. So the lighting designer is I guess a relatively new member in the sense, as in 50 years, I suppose, of what we call a creative team. And that role has been evolving, certainly for those last 50 years or so, in a very particular way. It's evolved in relationship to the evolution of technology. So it quite often gets mixed up with technology. I think we're now getting to a point where technology has become, if you like, paintbrushes and sculpting tools of the lighting design. I regard lighting design as being an art form, but I think that we have to understand that it's an art form that works alongside other. We're working in theatre, we're working alongside directors and designers, we're working with writers, we're working with choreographers, we're working with sound designers. It's a collaborative process. So good lighting design, if there is such a thing, is something which is able to embrace all of those areas, but also interpret those areas, because, as we were saying when we were just briefly chatting earlier, lighting design is very much the last part of the process of theatre making, or you could call it the last creative act in one sense, in the sense that the rehearsal process is completed, the sets have been built, the costumes have been made, the actors are prepared. The last thing that we do is actually in the theatre. It tends to be the addition of lighting and also sound design. So we're very much involved in the melding of those things. It's an illustrative art in the sense of illustrating performance. It's also a painterly art, sometimes described as, in terms of dealing with surface. And it's very much to do with combining those two things, the performance and the surface design. That's what I was thinking about. The question still gets asked, is it an art form? I think, yes, of course it is. It's a creative act. I think anything which is a creative act is an art form, by definition. So I regard myself as an artist in that sense. But as a good lighting designer, I know how important it is to work alongside my colleague designers, directors, and all the people that I previously mentioned. And I have a role to play in terms of presenting my own work, my own ideas, but also a role to play in illustrating others' ideas, which goes right through to play and choreography and things like that. So good lighting design is something which doesn't try to, in theatre brackets, is something which doesn't try to exist on its own. It exists as an entity, but within a context. And if you see a lighting design which is simply going off down its own path and ignoring those things, just simply for the sake of effect or somebody's personal view of something, then you know that's probably going wrong. There are exceptions to everything, so I'm being very general in terms of my definition. But I would say that good lighting design is something which is going to work and amplify and enhance every aspect of the production. As the very last stage of creativity, one is very intensively involved. It's a strange medium in that sense. We prepare a palette which looks very technical because it's on paper, it's plans, it's numbers, it's all sorts of things that are completely meaningless to the designer probably and also to the director. So there's no point in showing them the plan. Nonetheless, that plan has to contain all of the elements that you're going to work with when you actually do it. And the place that you do it is in the theatre. Doesn't mean there isn't lots of preparation going on, but that palette is very much internalised. I always think it's very dangerous to talk too much about what the lighting is going to be like to the director, but rather listen to the director and what they think about the play or whatever the piece is. And certainly when you work alongside people who become familiar who you're working with, that becomes something which you almost kind of don't need to talk about it until you actually get in there. You have to create an area of trust from your colleagues, from your co-artists, and you have to bring that into the theatre and then be allowed to get on with your work and make sure it's aligned to everything else that's going on. I'll stop there.
Thank you, Peter. John?
Yeah, I agree with every word, and and I will just address some aspects of, well, to your question, if lighting design is an art, I think definitely yes, and I think that something that every art does is representing by its medium, representing aspects of reality. It lets us look at reality in a different way, engage with our surroundings in a different way. And to differentiate what light design, an artistic lighting design does from commercial, whether the commercial will be a more dominant or beautiful or appealing to the senses, I think that the artistic lighting design will be more aiming to influence the spectator. And influence, I mean conceptually or emotionally, or sometimes on a corporal level, bodily level. And I would like to note something that Merlin Donald, he's a cognitive scientist, said about, he's writing about art and cognitive science, and he speaks about the artist as a cognitive engineer. So the role of the artist is to construct a certain experience that appeals to our senses. And appeals to our senses means to make us know something or feel something that we otherwise don't experience. I think that an artistic lighting design will have a more quality of musicality. We spoke about it before. It's more like a character with dynamics that changes in time. It has composition that changes in time. Suddenly it could be very self-evident. This is, you mentioned it, but I think that sometimes light can, in service of the production, become more pointing to itself, to the material qualities of light, and sometimes it could be more transparent. this balance is the work, one of the works of the lighting designer. It is indeed the last creative act in the production schedule, but the lighting design, at least for me, is being constantly created throughout the production process. And I don't meet a creative team at the beginning and just meet them later for the technical week. So we actually work on mise en scene together. We enforce aspects, conceptual aspects of the production together. It's an ongoing process. There are different kinds of signification that light and other media in the performance can exchange with each other. So light can enforce some things instead of a different media, for example. This demands a light artist to be very much sensitive to his collaborative to the collaborative team that he works with. This is for now.
Yeah. Thank you, man. Come on.
Yes, I think we have talked a little bit earlier before. Yeah, we all agree that lighting has a very special capabilities in the theaters. Comparatively, we are not that material, so lighting is very transparent on stage. But it's, on the other hand, it's very effective. It's very effective in a way that in a very subtle and subconscious and creating atmosphere that we usually we don't know. Like it's very funny. We are living in a lit world. If we are not in a lit world, everything everywhere will be dark. And we don't know this. We are living in light, but we are subtly affected by the atmosphere. We are creating for. So we are doing something. I always find that we are doing something magical. And another thing is like we just mentioned about is like making compared to a set or person designer. We have the tools of time. We are doing moments. We control moments and transitions. And like with sometimes with design designers and with person choreographers. And that is another thing that we have. We on top of the three-dimensional sculpting art that we are doing, that is another gifted dimensions, I would say, that we are going to work with, which is even difficult to describe how time will change things, and that is one thing. You just mentioned about influence to the audience. I learned a word when I'm studying. They always talk about how to make our design evocative, which is two ways. We always work on a context, or music, or play, or we work on context, and we try to interpret it. We enhance it. We find the best moments. We try to amplify it, or graphic moments to show how we interpret that. So that is definitely not just an art form. It's a interpretations, or it's a with collaborations with all the creative team. And that's why sometimes it's funny. I always use that joke to myself. We are lighting the soul. We are lighting the soul, but we do not show our lights. Yeah, it's funny, and I try to keep my mind alert there. I mean, we are working with other creative team and big foreign contacts, and how to make it into an art form. Yeah.
Thank you.
I was just going to say, I kind of, it's interesting the sort of comparison of darkness, because I kind of always refer to the space as the kind of blank black canvas, in the sense that we begin from darkness. It's one of the reasons why, in a sense, more often than not, when an audience comes into a space, we take away all the light and we begin again. And if you kind of believe that art is a mirror of life, that actually reflects it in a particular way, from a particular point of view, that's very much exactly what lighting is doing when you're working in the theatre. You're clearing the decks by taking away the light and then beginning again, maybe with a thin spot, maybe with a huge bright light or whatever. And that is your reflection of life. That is taking life, or taking an abstract view of life, whatever, and throwing it back at the viewers.
I should say that the all-maleness of this panel is not what we set out to do. Both Catherine
The
Williams,
girls are all busy.
yes, both Catherine Williams and Sasha Chivers, who were going to be on this panel, both had to absent themselves because of changes in their rehearsal schedules, which is also the case for Mark Jonathan. Just to quote Paulie Constable in her absence, her lecture to the 2 years ago for the Edward Gordon Craig lecture was titled Giving Shape to the Darkness, and it's a beautiful construction of her process, and I would ask you, if you're at all interested in the subject, which I assume you are because you're here, go online and find that lecture. It's a really nice piece of work. Scott, you've been thinking about this and writing about this for, it seems like years.
Yeah, it was years. So first of all, I just need to say that unlike my co-panellists, I'm not a professional lighting designer. I'm an educator and a researcher, an academic at University of Leeds. So take my responsibility with a pinch of salt compared to current professional practices. It seems to me that the question is quite a difficult one to answer. And I'm reminded of the age-old mantra which is still being churned out. I noticed a very well-known lighting designer in an American publication recently also repeated it, that good lighting in the theatre is that which is not seen. And this is repeated time and time again, and I have a real issue with that. Because if we look back historically, some of the key practitioners who've been thinking and writing about light, someone like Adolf Appia, for example, advocated the need for light to be an active element of the stage. So active, becoming a kind of co-player in the drama. So I think we need to acknowledge that light is not just something that illuminates and is there somehow in the background, but can actually be a key component of the theatrical experience. And I don't perhaps take issue with what's been said already in relation to whether it's always last in the process. There's some examples I can think of performance practices where light might be the first idea, and then the other elements respond to that. So I know traditionally in production practices, I'm the precious the lighting designer is often coming in at the last minute and responding and having to work very, very quickly under immense pressures. But I think there are situations where light, the ideas can stem from light. And there are pieces of dance where light has been the first thing and the dance evolved in relation to the light, for example.
In the UK, Michael Holt is a classic in that description, in that both Michael and the choreographer he's worked with, most Russell Malifant, go into the room as equal partners. So Michael will have a light idea that he wants to try out in the same way as Russell will have a dance idea.
So light being able to provoke action and also to have an impact on the audience. That's another area that I'm really fascinated by, the idea of the in relation perhaps to answering the question what is good lighting, lighting that makes perhaps stimulates us, makes us think about the piece we're looking at in a different way, touches us perhaps viscerally, makes an impact on our bodies, maybe lulls us.
Doesn't make you want to look
Yes.
We'll look at the performance.
Or it could make
Lulls us, assaults us, depending on the nature of the production, obviously. Might not want that in a Chekhov fight where you get assaulted, but we might. We might, absolutely. So it's impossible question to answer because it depends on the nature of the performance practice that we're engaged with.
Indeed, indeed. One of the questions that intrigues me, and we may not have a chance to go into this with any great depth, but it's around the idea of what is it you're trying to do when you set out to write a piece, and we touched on that. I think each of you have touched on that briefly going through. Peter, what are you trying to do when you start thinking about lighting a piece?
I think from a purely personal point of view, and I use the word slightly guardedly, I think I want to make it look beautiful, but that doesn't mean that it can't sort of look ugly sometimes in the right kind of way. It's to do with wanting people to see something that makes them want to go on looking at it. Very often that is making something look beautiful or attractive. Sometimes it's making something look quite sort of aggressive or harsh. But you kind of do it in a kind of attractive way, because you're trying to engage people in the material. So it's a bit like when you're making a movie. I mean, you want people to keep watching, and part of what lighting does with the production is keep you watching. It keeps giving you something to look at, as well as informing you and carrying the narrative and all of the other things that we kind of mentioned. But it's very much about that, and I think that's what I would be setting out to do. I mean, within the process, I'm in a couple of processes at the moment. We spend quite a bit of time looking at the designer's model, discussing with the director, what a scene might be like and what it might look like. And there'll be some mentions of perhaps specific lighting effects, or things like that. There's a fire in the background, something of that nature, or how we're going to interpret a sunrise. I'm thinking actually ghosts and something like that. But what I'm thinking about, in a sense, is how that's going to work in the space that we're going to do it, and how that's going to be something you really want to watch, something that's going to really work with the surface design. That's going to. I always like to say, I always think when you've done a piece and somebody comes in and photographs it, I always think it's a really good sign if it looks like stills from a movie. That's quite I suppose I'm thinking more plays and things there, but there's a kind of look that draws you into it, and it's not just pure naturalism. It really isn't. It might look like it, and I think that's what's interesting that you were saying about people saying good lighting shouldn't be, what's the phrase?
It shouldn't be noticed, I guess.
Shouldn't be noticed. I mean, that's talking about a particular area of work. It's talking about when you're doing, I don't know, a certain kind of play perhaps, or a certain kind of production of a certain kind of play. And you want it to be very naturalistic. Now, I mean, I work fortunately through all the areas of drama, dance, and opera. And I mean, certainly within the drama world, you do want to create lighting where you're not aware of cues, for example. And yet, sometimes you can break it down. There's a Pinter recently, which had something like 100 cues in it, but I hope that you would never know. And I think in a sense that's what I would refer that to. That there are times when you don't want to suddenly go, somebody says this, somebody goes, like that. You're not trying to do that. You're trying to do something which I would call controlled naturalism, where you're taking naturalistic references like time changes, like weather changes, and you're using them for your own purposes to actually direct people towards the aspect of mood and feeling of that particular scene that you want to get through to. And then there are other times when you want to do something which is really upfront. And sometimes that's in the dance world. Yeah, I agree. I think very often can lead the idea. Or sometimes it's musicals, or whatever. You just need to do something flashy because that's what people want. But both those things exist, and I'm very attracted to both aspects of that in terms of what I do. I mean, I've just done a huge show out in Australia, which was very flashy and very kind of blues-bang, and then came back to work a tiny little week out in London. And both things for me are equally relevant and equally important. Very important to work across all of those areas, both in scale and context.
Yes, it's a good question. Actually, I never thought of how, when you talk about what we are trying to do, right? Sometimes I'm amazed that when I get an assignment or get a piece of work, I try to look for anything interesting. And surely make it beautiful. But in the progress, I just react to it and look for interesting moments and make it influence. I just like try to pick up just some things that what I'm doing or what I just did. It's like along the rehearsal, I will draw down moments in my lighting interpretations. So you know, when they're doing rehearsal, they have many movements and things like that. But I will, like an audience, I have snapshots of myself. So I know that is the moments that it's moments by moments that I'm connecting to make up interesting dramatic stages. So I think a designer is always that's our jobs and capabilities to make sure that you are entertained, you get something and you're influenced with our works. That's why I think on that.
For me, I always try. I start with thinking how I can structure the piece in light. I'm looking for a certain process that the space will go through, and I'm looking for the drama of space in the light. It connects, of course, to my subjective interpretation of the material I work with, whether it is dance or theater. And it is a little bit like giving spectacles for the spectators to watch through. And every time, every moment, you actually decide, you actually compose a certain light image that has a hierarchical composition. But not only like in film, and not only that you reconstruct the space out of darkness, but also it becomes symbolically different than just how the space is, just the scenography, the physical scenography. I would like to initiate kind of limitations or poetic rules that connect to the dramaturgy of the production. And in some cases, in some productions, it depends on the dramaturgy, of course, to make the spectators aware to the fact that they watch theater, that it's artificial, and to involve them in a more critical way, conceptually or emotionally, concerning what they watch. That's in short.
Thank you. Scott, writers in English, to my knowledge, or at least practitioner writers, have been pretty poor in the past at writing about why they're doing what they're doing. quite a lot of writing about how they're doing what they're doing. What have you found?
I think light is quite a difficult subject to write about to describe those feelings we have in words. And it surprised me when I was doing my research for my book about how little historically has been written about light as a creative aspect of thought. Quite a lot's been written about how we do it in terms of textbooks and guidance. But I think because in the modern era we've gradually developed a kind of language of light. And I think there are very few practitioners. I mean, actually, I don't know whether you know this, but there's one of your 1985 piece you wrote for a dance journal about light has been reprinted. Which is a fantastic and a fantastic piece of writing, written in the mid-80s, and it still has relevance today. And what you wrote to do then, particularly for dance practitioners, was to first of all give a flavour of how the light designer might be used in a creative collaboration, but also to articulate the potential of light as a creative tool. So that's why that's reprinted in the book. And actually, there are very few examples. Sorry to embarrass you, but there are very few examples. That's why one I could, off the top of my head, that I could use to help open up the debate about this area of practice.
I want to share a lot of my experience. The reason why I want to share is because when I was studying in the United States, I am lucky with a mentor, and we are encouraged to writing we call light diary. So we observe or use a case or pictures or something, and we trying to use words or describe it. So we try to train ourselves how to see and how to talk about the executive that I think that I was encouraged to do so. And when I'm working with directors, the first thing I try to not listen to is don't tell me bright or darkness. Don't talk to me in general numbers. I want you to describe what you want. I want adjectives. Or one word. Yeah. Then I will do it. Don't worry about it. Yeah, don't tell me brighter. I mean, I always say brightness is relative. Brightness is relative.
Sure.
Yeah.
And words are not often enough.
Yeah. Yeah.
And what is a blue light?
Yeah, exactly.
And kind of if words were enough, there'd be no point in having any kind of sonography, because you could just read it in a book. Peter, it's I need to transfer into some images. Do you want to talk about particular things, or?
I don't know. Yeah. Can talk about things.
Yeah.
You're going to throw them up, am I going to talk?
If that's what you want to do.
I don't know.
Or we could go. No, let's do that.
We could do that, or I don't know if that's. I'm always quite keen to make it as participatory as possible. If people have got questions at this stage, then file them in, because it's always good to know what you guys are thinking.
I agree with all of what you said.
Good.
But the artistic, I'm a lighting designer myself, and I think I'm artistic. I'm darn good, and I can make wonderful lighting. But where's the scale with people like James Turrell, Oliver Eliasson? Those people don't need a director, don't need a set designer, don't need a costume designer. They make art from their ethic, from their own art.
I do
And I
argue
was-
with that.
Well,
Sorry.
no, hang finish. I want to hear.
And I was thinking while you were speaking, how many people, and it's also reflecting to your latest sentence, how many people did not have ever had any comment of any one of your team, of your creative team, and you had to do a change just to comfort comfort their ideas, just show them. So make a change in your plan.
I hear exactly what you're saying, and I think we've actually said that already. In the sense that yes, it's a collaborative form. You can call it a try-out if you want to. That's fine. I mean, James Turrell, Eliasson, who's the guy who does the tubes?
Yeah,
McCall.
Flavin.
No, it's not where they all
Dan Flavin. Dan
they're
Flavin.
using tubes
Dan
instead,
Flavin.
first of all.
Dan Flavin.
No, I mean, listen, I'm a big James Turrell fan, but I also went to the Light exhibition in London recently, and I found it 70% disappointing, and I wouldn't put half of it in the foyer of a hotel, frankly. But what's interesting is that there's a kind of awareness there, and that's become part of that dialogue. I mean, yeah, it's very different. You know, when you make a light piece, you know, like James might do, for a gallery in a control situation, that's one thing, and that's fine. And no, he doesn't have to relate to anybody else. But that doesn't stop the other kind of work that we do, in a sense, having just as much value, I don't think, because it's like saying, you know, is a painter more valuable than a stage designer, for example, you know, or is it more creative or less creative? It's not a useful argument, I don't think.
Well, I feel myself humble to their art, if we call it art, and I can cope with being humble and call myself a designer. And a designer is trying to make the best out of something that you do for other people, for putting it on you put your work on other work all the time. And I don't want to set things down, but I just want to make a comment.
No, absolutely. I mean, we live in a postmodern world, you know, and so does James Turrell, and everything is cross-referenced in exactly that way. So he's taking stuff from what he's seen somewhere else and turning it into something that works for him. His work has been very influential on a number of both stage designers and lighting designers over the last 20, 30
mine,
years.
yeah.
You know, I've had loads of, I mean, when we first became aware of his work, loads of designers going, hey, this looks like James Turrell. And you go, yeah, give me a gallery, take away the audience, don't have a performance, and I will.
But
the Turrell's work is quite theatrical.
Well,
It's very theatrical.
Yeah.
He's the best of the bunch, as far as I'm concerned.
and uses
So I think
framing.
that's interesting. Sorry?
Yeah, and uses framing a lot as well. Which
Oh, I mean, the little, well, not little thing. The thing was a little theatre,
yeah,
basically.
yeah.
It's literally that.
And I think there are many things to be learned as well. Don't get me wrong at all. But Turrell doesn't come from nowhere. His ideas don't come from nowhere, and just the same as our ideas don't come from nowhere. Rembrandt's ideas didn't come from nowhere.
It's very interesting that just people have become aware of lighting as a medium of creativity, just like paint or stone or steel. And I think that's interesting. I think that affects all of us, and it's changing, which is also interesting. You can tell that it's changing the kind of designers who are emerging, and that's a very interesting thing. I think the young designers who come and spend time with us and work experience or whatever, you can tell that there's a Nick that's better than anybody, but there is a new attitude coming through. There is a new breed of designers coming through, and I think you have to understand the history of lighting design, and I'm talking about lighting design as we know it now, over the last 50 years, that it emerged very much from a kind of technical area. You know, I mean, way back pre-Second World War, it was electricians, you know, doing what the director said. You know, give me a blue light, do that, do this, do the other, and that changed in the kind of 50s and 60s as more sophisticated equipment emerged. The palette emerged to take all that further, to take up the ideas of Craig and Appiah and actually apply it and say, hey, we can actually do this now, not just make drawings of it. And that's gone through a whole generation of people. But those people grew very much out of this kind of technical area, and still do to some extent. But you can see it's changing. The generations who are coming through now are much more interested in what we're talking about right now, which is the aesthetic of writing and the art of writing. And I think that will be different. That will change. You could feel them coming through. I didn't train as a lighting, so as you can guess.
I think associated with
stage design. So.
I think associated with that is a kind of an increased visual awareness of the population as a whole, and an appreciation of visual aspects.
It's a combination of all of them.
And in relation to theatre practice, I guess, a widened appreciation of all the elements of performance rather than the script as being the dominant thing. And certainly looking at the exhibition here and thinking about previous theatre exhibitions I've seen in the UK and internationally, certainly 20 years ago, the role of a lighting designer was barely even mentioned as a credit.
Well, you look at the Olympics, look at rock and roll, look at all of that. People at a very broad level are now aware of lighting, and lighting is something that people actually look at and appreciate. Like they might appreciate the sort of big fireworks. So, yeah, I think
any other questions? Well,
yeah,
yes.
I just wondered if there were any books or any writers that the panel could recommend to someone who is wanting to look into the history of the past 50 years of lighting design.
books on lighting.
Well, how it's developed artistically. You're saying
There
there's
is
not
one.
that many, but that.
I've only ever read one.
I don't know. I would say I like Francis Reed did write a book. He wrote a lot of book about the art of lighting, but theology. But he did write a book. It's called The Lighting Art.
No.
Sorry, what
That's Palmer.
Each family with aesthetics.
It's out of print if you can get hold of it.
No, this is one. No, but
Who's that by?
Richard H. Palmer.
No.
McGraw-Hill. You can pick it up on Amazon.
Yeah, with which
Francis Reed did write another book. It's called. He's talk about how he see light instead of how he.
Fading, yeah.
Yeah.
There are several books by Francis.
Yeah. But this one is also another one is exceptional. Yeah.
I've only ever read one book about lighting. It's by Richard Pilgrim.
Yeah.
Only book I've ever read.
Yeah.
And he's just, is it the new one, is it a reprint? He's got a new book out which is more kind of autobiographical, because he's a fantastic guy. But he's also updated a book simply called Stage Lighting. The only one I'm afraid ever read.
The best historical book is Lighting in the Theatre, which is by Gosta Bergman. But again, that's out of print. It was written in 1977, and he died before it was printed.
You're sure if it's the up-and-coming thing, there'd be less books out of print?
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, that's why I produced a book which has quite a significant amount of historical material in.
I didn't have to name it.
By Scott Palmer.
Scott Palmer.
It's a Palgrave Macmillan. It's called Light Readings in Theatre Practice, and there's a very large bibliography in the back of there which might also help you.
That's great, thank you.
Sorry, yes.
Yes, hi. This is possibly quite a naive question, so please excuse my ignorance, because my background isn't lighting. However, I wondered how long does it take to perfect a lighting design on a touring show, and how easy is it to adapt it to various theatre spaces?
So
How long does it take to refine a lighting design for a touring show,
Yes,
and how
so
easy is it to adapt it to different spaces?
Because obviously the fabrics within the space are going to light differently.
There's bits of that are quite how to do it, but there is something fundamental in there, that the whole business of how you adapt a lighting room.
Adapting an existing show for touring, or creating something to go straight on tour?
Either. So let's say, for instance, you were working on Limmy's, and that started in a West End theatre and then went into the north of England. How would you take that lighting concept from, say, the King's Theatre into the Palace Theatre in Manchester, because obviously
Right, okay.
their
Yeah.
black box is going to have different fabrics in there
Well-
that are going to absorb the light differently.
You know the venue.
Oh, it doesn't necessarily mean those fabrics.
You see, I've gone to Rick Fisher's talk several days ago. He talked about that.
Excellent. I mean, I've got to say, it's a lot easier now than it used to be. But I mean, like years ago, the companies who were fantastic at doing that were companies like, and still are, Rombert Dance, who were basically on the road all the time, and they've always had a very high standard of lighting design. But of course, they tour their rig everywhere, so certain aspects of the lighting will actually travel everywhere. And if you were taking a show out from the West End, you would do the same thing. You might be forced by the producer to reduce it slightly, so that it fits into venues and so it's economic, etc. All of those kind of things. But basically, these days, we pretty much tour everything. It all goes out on the road, and the only thing which really changes is front positions, front of house positions have to be adapted slightly to work into that. But we have, and this is getting a bit technical, but I mean, we've got fantastic ways now of plotting moving light shows, everything. There are lots of ways of doing it, and lots of very, very skilled people who will take these shows out and reproduce them around the place. But I mean, I'm doing next year Traviata in Glyndebourne, and I mean there we've got a separate production period for the tour, because the tour will be going into smaller theatres, and that we actually have a full relight session to prep it for the tour. So I'll have done one version for Glyndebourne itself, and then do a complete relight based on the same design. And you know, you can trying to get it back into the kind of aesthetic area. If you've established a strong enough aesthetic for the piece, then you can move it around. And you can very often do something which you did with 50 lights. You can still get the same look with 25.
Yeah. Or the same feel.
If you've got a strong central concept, you really right.
Yeah.
Because you know you have to. But it's not just going blob, 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 blob. There needs to be an idea running through it, and then that idea can be expanded or reduced.
Sometimes, and where this comes up a lot is in reproducing work for repertoire sometime after it's been first performed, and perhaps, especially nowadays, the lanterns that you're using are completely different from the lanterns that were being used. And somehow, I used to work for English National Opera, somehow I feel that we need to get better at recording the feeling that was generated by that light, because it's not enough to say there was a light from here and it was a Mac 3000 and it was in this gobo, in this frame, and it landed here and it cut there and it cut there, because it's no longer a Mac 3000. So what are you going to do? What feeling are you trying to write?
Try not to use a Mac 3000.
We don't want the answer to sorry. Here first.
Sorry, I'm Claire. I work at Roscoe, so I'll put that out there. But my question is very much similar off the back of what you just said. It was talking about art and aesthetics, but taking the terminology out of the toolbox. You have light, colour, shadow, play with, and more. Is there anything you fear? Fear. Anything you fear?
I would say time. As you talk about, I don't know much about because every area, every different places have different production schedules. But I just mentioned the lighting designer is the last one seriously working in production schedules, and we are the goalkeeper. You know, then time isn't not fear. It's a challenge. I would say, time is a challenge to us because we have the same deadlines, opening deadlines, like coming along us. Yeah. So I would say time.
Do you mean the fear that is a reason to take the
technological terminology out of the discussion?
I
Or
took that out because this is a discussion about art. I don't want to, not today, hear about the units and fixtures and things like that, but art as a sense of, is there anything that you jump straight into anything, for be it shadows and light, brightness, dimness, colour?
I think it really depends with who you speak, because if you speak with the director or with the choreographer, they don't need to hear the kind of lantern and which filter number and so on. So with them you speak differently than how you speak with the technical director. So and with the creative team, I will speak in terms of atmospheres, or the effects, or the ideas, and so on. With the technical department, of course, in the technical jargon. So, did I answer your question, or you meant something else?
I think I have a fear. I have an ongoing fear. It gets less as you get more experienced, but a fear that the palette that I've created won't work. And within an hour of being in the theatre with it all in position, I know if it's going to work. And that's the big thing, because there is a gap between what you prepare, which you're kind of preparing blind, these days on CAD drawings, but before that with pens and paper, etc., etc. You are doing that to some extent blind. You can't make a model of a lighting design. You can do little scribbles, and I agree, I do that as well. Years of notebooks, but you can't make. Even if you use a virtual, because somebody's going to say, what about virtual? Yeah. Even if you use a virtual construction, it's still not the same. There's only so much you can do, and then there's that moment where it's all gone into the theatre. It's all exactly as you have specified, and it's totally in my head, and then it's got to work. And exactly as you were saying, time. You have to work fast. In the majority of situations, you don't have much time to be wrong. So if you've got your palette wrong, you're fucked, basically. There's no excuse me. That's the truth.
You've got to jump out of your comfort zone pretty quick.
You've got to make some pretty radical, very fast decisions if you're going to change anything, and it's going to affect the schedule, because the schedules are so tight these days that, I mean, we don't even have on plays separate lighting sessions. No, we work. I like on the majority of. I'm talking about West End shows and the National Theatre and all of that. We light over the tech. I have time to focus the rig, prep, and then we're straight into tech. No separate lighting sessions at all. In drama, doing the opera world, a little bit in the ballet world, and actually I don't mind that, because actually we can now work. We have the facility technically to work very fast. It means you're actually working with the actors, and I quite like that, because the actors then, I say that actors should know whether that is just like in a little chair, and they actually enjoy it, as long as you don't slow everything down.
Yeah.
So it's got to be, that's my fear.
But I want to make some comments about, because I know this, you're from Moscow, right?
Yes.
That's why I want to say some words about the
Planet next to Mars, isn't it?
Because the fear. How do we tackle the fear? Is I know a lot of designers have a comfort zone. Comfort zone means they have a preference of palettes to make sure that it works for them. That's like, I know there's millions, hundreds of
particular mix of colours.
Yeah, particular mix of colours, or several channels. I shouldn't say channels in the lighting arts discussing colour. A certain approach, I would say. Certain approach in color or palettes, to make themselves at least comfortable.
And insurance policy. It's a
bit extra lamps.
Yeah, definitely.
You have a question?
I have a follow-up question to Peter on what we were just talking about. Intrigued, if that's ever happened to you, where you've kind of got to a situation where you feel like the palette's just not working, or I've had it with a director who you felt like all along you've really tuned in with what they're going to want, and you get to the tech and they just hate everything you've shown them. How have you dealt with that?
How do you deal with it?
Yeah.
So it's very interesting. You either never work with them again,
Yeah.
that's one scenario, or you have to do some kind of damage limitation, I guess, if that situation is right. I mean, listen, this is complicated, and this is to do with the kind of collaborative process. You're going to work with directors, and it's not going to work. There are going to be people who you work with, there are going to be designers who you work with, and it isn't going to work. And it's never going to work, and so it never happens again. Then there are other instances where you work with a director, but you've never worked with them before. So you're both talking a slightly different language. And then the job becomes to try and, there are two things. One, try and narrow the gap between those different languages. Understand what the director is actually trying to say, because sometimes they say things that they don't really mean as well. And you have to find out, it just becomes a slightly longer process. You have to kind of say, well, okay, what do you mean? Do you mean that? You know. At the same time, you have to do that without losing your identity. And that is a tricky political aspect of collaborative work. It's the same for designers. I mean, I know designers who, just, produce a model and just didn't think it was going to be like that. When they see the world set. So it's a trying process, and I presume you haven't worked with that person before.
No, yeah, the new person's work with.
Right. So
But it has become more.
you have to give a bit. You have to give a bit, but not too much. I think you have to make something. Ideally, you create something that they've never thought of, but they love.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, that's what you have. You have to sort of surprise them. I don't believe that it should ever become a service industry where you're just doing what the director asks you to do, because you should be contributing to the whole thing. And any director works yourself will recognise that and want that, in fact, want that contribution. So, in a sense, but you have to kind of try and go around their heads. How is this person thinking? And you can see some of that by watching what they do in rehearsal as well. You get an idea of where their heads are at.
I have a discussion. I have a description about this situation. It's like in a good collaborations, collaborations. A good lighting designer always is a good listener. Has to be a good listener, but it doesn't follow all the orders or all the requests. It has to be a good listener with integrity. It's difficult. It's very difficult. Yeah, to have integrity with your own thoughts, is challenging, I would say. But you have to be very good listener.
It's true. But I think sometimes you have to show them something that they're asking for, and then prove to them that they're really not asking for. No, I mean that happens even with directors who it happens as you have a window go. Okay, we'll put it in. Okay, you were right, take it out.
It seemed to me that there were a lot of drama directors of my generation, around 50 now, who were very text-based, and you really had to train them to use their eyes and to understand what was going on stage, and not just from a lighting design perspective. I think that younger directors that I see now are far more visually aware, but I think there were a whole generation of directors who focused far too much on text. So we had a question from the back.
I would like to hear more about your collaboration with stage designers.
Collaboration with stage designers.
Because it's some question about some harmony or some competition sometimes.
Well, I had a situation, I will try to answer your question with referring also to such a situation of, I call it total collapse. It happened with a big rap dance company, I will not mention where. And there was a set with a reflective stage floor curving into a backdrop.
Oh.
It was in a theater. It was tested in a quite dark theater, and later came to the biggest theater of the capital. And there were a lot of bulbs in the stairs. So even when there is a blackout, the stage was just looked like a kermis or something. Yeah, it looked like a carnival without me doing anything. Now, the entire visual dramaturgy of this piece was based on projections and play with perception of space, twisting the perception of space, that the floor and the back wall are actually one surface, or even that the back wall turns into a ceiling, using some graphic elements that were made by Roscoe robots, glass robots. So, anyway, 1.5 days before the premiere, we decided, the set designer and the choreographer, to literally cut the back wall. They came and really took it out, and with it all the projections, all the idea that was. So the entire design was actually ruined, and I had maybe another hour that was off schedule to go around and not to fix, but to design completely a new design. So we had to go back to the ideas, to the atmospheres that we were looking to create, and we did it using just the repertory lighting system that I honestly really dislike. I use it when it answers some needs, but the visual ideas are not coming from what is there. But there is first an idea and then how to make it in the most economic time, money and so on. I had the premiere, and 2 months later in another very big theater, I had another 2 hours or something to come and fix it a little bit. And eventually I got nominated for a very important prize for this piece. So I don't know.
Osaka, thinking on your feet. Thinking on your feet is a big
on
part.
the feet.
Yeah. You call it thinking on your feet. Yeah. Your relationships with stage design are really, really important, I think.
You've done a lot of work with Hildegard.
Yeah, you know Hildegard Beckler's work. It's Hildegard Beckler. Her work is out there.
Yeah. In more senses as well.
Yeah. I mean, we work together quite a lot, and we will consult quite early on about materials, painting techniques, even. You know, because if you're going to backlight or frontlight across, you know, what to use. We'll have quite detailed discussions about all those sorts of things. And that's true of most of the designers, actually, what they want with, but especially the ones when you've been working with a designer on quite a lot. You know, you get rung up quite early, especially if it's because nowadays a lot of designs involve perhaps light boxes, things like that. You know, what material should we use, and how are we going to do this? Have we got enough depth for this? So we work together quite closely, and I think that's very much the way it should be. I mean, that's what I like. I mean, you generally find if you work with somebody for the first time, there's a little bit less of that. But as you get to know, again, it's this thing of trust. You know, mutual trust of working together means that you then become quite an important part of the sort of consultation process of, is this going to work in the set likewise at a very early stage. So I think it's terribly important.
Well, the case that I told about was also a first-time collaboration, and we did all kind of tests with the materials, and we made photos, and we tried with dancers. We did actually everything, simulations even. We did everything that would have been possible. But still, the choreographer and the set designer didn't imagine the result later on in the theater. I'm not speaking only about the box from the stairs, but even the idea of lighting design was a little bit like, we didn't expect that. So even with making all these preparations, it could sometimes not work. Just because different tastes, because of we imagine different things too.
And there are certain things you don't find out until you're in the theatre.
Yes.
Yeah, nobody finds out. You know, sometimes you discover things that you hadn't even thought of which is again to do with that kind of think on your feet thing. You know? It's a process.
I'd like to just go back to take a few more questions later, but I'd just like to go through with youre the case study, if you like,
Yeah.
that you put together.
Yeah. I want to address one of your questions about how do we discuss the artistic aspects of lighting design in performance. And I chose to bring one image from, I will analyze one image from a theater performance of Romeo Castellucci. Are you familiar with his work here? Some? No? Okay. Well, Romeo Castellucci is one of the most celebrated contemporary theater makers, visual artist as well in his education. And in the test case that we will discuss now, there is a very interesting semiotics and poetics of light. If you can please go to the next dia. In the last Prague quadrennial, in a talk with Romeo Castellucci, he said, and I assume quite jokingly, he said, "No magic. The work is not a work of imagination. I like more connection between things that belong to us." But on a more serious note, the work of Castellucci examines the boundaries between how to represent something real, something true, in a place that is not real, like theater, or how to present actual reality on stage, and at the same time avoid or walk on the line, not to cross the line into a fictive or illusionistic representation. If you can please go to the next, that's the last quotation before I show you the images. Taken from a book of Nicholas Rideout. This tendency to see the real in the work of the company called Societas Rafael Sanzio is in fact a fact of the success of their theatrical pretending. The intensity of the encounter was produced by the fact that I had never seen anyone else taking the imitation game so seriously. It was as though no other theater had considered that it might be possible to make representations that might be taken for the real thing, as though no one else believed that the theater might be a kind of magic. And now I want to connect to the light and the way he uses light. By the way, he is also designing the light for his performances. With his minimalistic aesthetics of light, and also other things in the performance, it reflects the ambivalence of Castellucci, so the theatrical convention of make-believe, and the light as well. So I would like to ask, what role does the light play in embodying a sense of realness? Okay, how does the light make it feel more real? Let's go please to that photo. I'm going to describe very shortly one scene of the performance. The title is "On the Concept of the Face Regarding the Son of God."
Turn the lights in the auditorium down. The photo above is taken from the beginning of the scene, and the photo below is on a more progressive stage of this scene. The piece has three sections. The first section is about an older man taking care of his elderly father. The father cannot restrain the content of his balls, and he is literally shitting on the stage.
then, after this scene, there is the scene that we are going to speak about. It's a scene with, it starts with one child entering the space, going down stage, center stage, with a bag, a school bag on his shoulder. He slowly throws the content of his bag on the floor, and what we see and hear are dozens of grenades, bombs. He looks at the bombs on the grenades and picks one, throws the grenade towards the portrait of Christ at the back of the stage, and an interactive interface creates a sound of explosion in the moment the grenade hits the portrait, and then the grenade is rolling on the floor. We hear the sound. It happens a few times before another child enters, and eventually 12 to 14 children enter the space and do just the same. So I would like to, if you go please to the next photo, I would like to analyze this photo. I took this photo in Antwerp in February 2012. It's really from above, so you can imagine that most of the people don't see the shadows of the children on the floor, they just see shadowed teenagers. There are actually two images that we saw. The first is the more conventional, banal, overexposed. It's a kind of, it's made of Fresnel's lamps with 201, the famous 201 filter from Lee. And it uses a line of backlights and a line of front of house. And in the image, this is the image I'm going to focus on. There are only a set of 6 Fresnels, soft light, soft quality of light. The light creates a space in between the children, the shadowed children, and the portrait. We see the grenades very clearly. They fly, and because of this dynamic object, it attracts very much the attention of the spectators. And they are highlighted above, of course, because of the top light, and shadowed below. And then, in a very slow transition, the light, the exposed image, the conventional image, becomes more symbolic, more expressive with these shadows. This is what we see now. This is that photo. I would like to refer to this light image, the aesthetics of this light, using 3 categories. The first category is the relation that the light creates with the performer. Castellucci, it seems that Castellucci prevents from us spectators to identify or create empathy toward these performers, first by positioning them with their backs to the audience and letting them function more as a chorus, not as individuals, as a group of people that execute a performative action, here and now. There is nothing particular in the way that each one of the children is doing. They are not directed, they are just instructed. The light turns the children to anonymous, the anonymity is increased. We kind of lose the children in this light image. The silhouettes, on the other hand, could get more, we could project on the silhouettes, I would say, more associations or ideas or emotions. So all these are more dependent on us as spectators to be actively involved in the construction of the meaning for this situation. We don't understand the reason why they do it. We have to invent it ourselves. The second category that we could refer to this light image is the relation that the light creates with the space. The in-between space that is being illuminated gains prominence as the venue of conflict between the children, the protagonists, and the portrait of Christ, the antagonist. And there is a kind of imaginary web of traces, the traces of the grenades that are flying by all these performers, of illuminated points moving in the space, in the air, creating kind of imaginary web between the children and their objective. The light space becomes perhaps a representation of the conflict between pupils and institution, between followers and a shepherd in the context of Christ, between children and a father, between even modernity on the stage floor and classicism at the upstage. And if you would like, with all these experiments on the floor, between action painting and old master portrait at the back. The last category that I could analyze the light in relation to is light and in relation to the visual perception itself. We become aware of our state of spectatorship as spectators sitting in the theater by our disability to identify the children anymore. We could before, but now we cannot anymore. The aesthetics of light brings the loss of identity of the children. And the light isolates one aspect of what happens on stage, of a monotonous, continuous activity that takes maybe 10 minutes, this throwing of grenades. And just by the change of light, it's very, very simple, just by the change of light, of showing us something else, it's a little bit like a camera walk, and taking away something, we get an opportunity to see again what happens. And what happens physically on stage is exactly the same. But the way we see it, the way we reassess what happens is happening in our imagination, first in our perception, then in our imagination. The light definitely turns the scene into a more radical. And what we can see also is an artistic choice of Castellucci here as a lighting designer to deviate from the theatrical convention by which the driving force of a scene, of a performance, are the performers, are the human being. And this is something typical for the work of Castellucci. It's a very visual theater, almost never any use of text. So it's really a theater of image. What we see here is kind of unknown bodies that turn into the idea of a character in the mind of the spectator. It's more like looking at silhouettes in a black mirror. So the light creates a beautiful manipulation here on the spectator, and it convinces us to look and to think in a certain way. So therefore I think that in this example, although the light is extremely simple, it is functioning as an argument. So it's really rhetoric, isn't it?
There's a couple of things that makes me think about there as well, about the light being an interrogator, like exposing, laying bare, opening up. And there's also something, I don't know these like you do, but it also suggests something about kind of antidote to kind of religious imagery of light.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, the colour white that's being used in relation to perhaps the content of that piece as well.
Yeah, and also in the previous scene with the man and his wife, he also tries to disappear all shadows. And this is a convention of the medieval icons, of holy ones. There is no shadow. Shadow doesn't prevail where holiness is.
Well, those things as we're flying through light.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's a dark space between the light space and
The top lights are in between the
spatially.
yeah.
There's a white spot,
Half stage is white,
and then there's a dark area.
and then black stage. Yes.
So that
Then he
the
turns
grenade is flying through light when we pass over the dark.
at the beginning, and then he shifts in using top lights for the grenades.
There's a thing that reminded me of, which was, I'm going to get this wrong now, the Chichester Macbeth with Captain Picard.
Yes.
That was you.
No, I didn't do it. I was doing the piece next door.
I can't remember who lit it.
I took,
Was it Q?
no, it was, hang on, I'll get it.
My clockwork computer needs speeding up, sorry. I'm trying to load an image of it. But that, again, is, if I read it right, that there was a lot of the dehumanisation of the baddies, in inverted commas, by blasting backlight at them, and just so you just saw these shapes appeared in a misty pattern. And that's a particular kind of aesthetic. Ian?
That was a really great way of talking about light through there. But something that stuck in my mind is at the very beginning still included the catalog number for the gel that was overhead.
Yes.
So, my question from that is, I rarely hear painters talking about cadmium. I mean, maybe senior painters, but somebody who, as an artist, is a painter, talking about cadmium, which is, makes most of the reds that might be mixed into their paint. Do we have as lighting designers, or artists who work with light, do we have the vocabulary to, right now, to move away from those sort of technical elements, where we can talk about it strictly in pure aesthetics and as an artistic practice? And if we do, right, and if we don't, what will it take for us to be able to talk art, be able to separate in the way that we discuss it, separate the art from the technical part of it, or is that even necessary? I guess it's 3 questions.
Well, I think that the book of Palmer actually speaks about how individual the experience of watching is. So if we describe a very harsh, strong light beam, will it mean for you as it means for me? I guess not, because it depends on the sensitivity of our eyes, it depends on how the stimulus is received in our brain, and what we do with it. How do we interpret it? Does it cross the threshold that it becomes significant for me or not? Because I select what to pay attention to, and what to take as a sign, and what to leave as, in the noise.
So it's experiences we have from our past life that we can relate that feeling to. So we're all going to respond to that in a different way. I think he was using the 201 example as a shorthand.
Yeah.
I mean, I think we're getting there in terms of being able to discuss the sort of aesthetics in isolation. I think that's what you're asking. Isn't it? I would hope we are. I think we do it more and more. That's why we're here right now. But also, I think that critically, I mean, we are getting more response from people who write about theatre, the critics, and there's always I don't mention the writing very often, but there's reasons for that. But there are more writers writing about theatre who are much more aware of it, and therefore also discussing it as an aspect of the performance. I mean, I notice that certainly more and more. So that's a good thing, because they don't care what the bloody unit was that's done it. They care that there's a beautiful lighting that's giving a Rembrandt-like effect or whatever they're going to write. And that means that people are discussing this theatre in that way. And as I said, I think there's a generation of people coming through now who are going to be more concerned with this, who will just take the equipment for granted, which is what we should be doing in a sense. I mean, I couldn't run a writing pad. I mean, I did years and years and years ago, but not anymore. And I'm not interested in doing it because I've got, well, just like you have editors in film, you know, I've got fantastic programmers who work with them to do that. It means that I can work from the user technology. I need to be able to know what all these things can do, but I don't have to build one. I have to know how to use it. And I think that's that's coming through. So yes, I think it's going to.
This also goes back to this idea of our words enough, doesn't it? And a kind of language of light. I know the Association of Light Designers has actually been active in working with critics, actually teaching some professional critics about how they might respond to light in productions they see. And I think you've been involved in some of that.
We've done bits of that. There's critics workshops are documented in the editions of Focus. Yes, sir.
Just wanted to ask, just mention kind of briefly then about some people will see, say, news that's appearing behind us and images that you were showing. And a lot of people's instant reaction is to go, oh, that looks great. What gel was it? What light was it? Rather than going, why did you do that? Where did you get that idea from? How did you get to that point? Forgetting the light, forgetting the gel first. Where's that coming in? That seems to be missing sometimes.
I think that's what we have to get to.
But I thought our kind of very semiotic analysis of that really did get beyond that, you know, because that was a real, I thought, great analysis of that. I mean, apart from sort of mentioning 2 other machines.
And 6 for now. 1 cake.
Yeah.
But for me,
that was by the by for me. And I mean, the interesting thing is the analysis of what it's actually doing in terms of audience perception. You know, that's what we're interested in.
These are static images, though, aren't they? That we're responding to. They have one moment in performance. Of course, lighting is temporal art, and I think what you tried to do, Yaron, there is give us a sense of the journey of the light. Even though you showed us only 1 or 2 images of that, you get a sense of the journey through time of the way in which light was working. And that's the other aspect. I think when we often look at a single image and go, oh, that we can respond to something, but we can't, unless we've seen the performance, we can't really assess that other than kind of whether it's particularly pleasing, whether it speaks to us as a static image.
It's when you're trying to maybe understand your amazing light design, trying to understand where someone who is working on a level there that working set designs and everything like that, is understanding how they arrive at those ideas. And sometimes you read any text, and I was taught by Scott a number of years ago.
Bad luck.
Yeah, and there was such an emphasis on how you find your ideas first, before anything else. And I've seen some lectures like Rick Fisher's and stuff that's talked about, and Tim Routledge's, that just talks about how many moving lights it was, what gel it was, and people just seem to miss.
Well, I think that does happen. I mean, just to use a personal example, I have a couple of pieces with David Bentley with Birmingham Royal Ballet. And the first one was a piece, well, not the first one of these 2, was a piece called E equals MC squared, which was a piece that he was creating to a commissioned score, a new commissioned score by Matthew Henson. In that, he rang up and he said, I don't want a set, I just want the space defined by light. It's in 4 sections, get on with it. And then we had the music to work from, and then we had 4 very separate, specific sections which needed to be defined purely with light, and then costume. And you know, when you start working on something in that kind of way, then it's the aesthetic that comes way before thinking about how to achieve it technically. I mean, on that, I very rarely do attempt drawings of light because I think it's a slightly dangerous thing to do. But on that instance, I did because it was to do with shapes of light, with light as surfaces as well as just illuminating people. And so you do begin a starting point from the idea, from the visual, not from the equipment. You then look how you're going to achieve it. And that obviously has to come from a more technical base because you've got to do it. Otherwise, back with that piano.
Have to be the last question.
Yeah, no, I was just going to agree.
Yeah, do.
As someone in the early stages of career in lighting design, I think there's definitely a place for both of those discussions, because certainly the inspirations that come from the visual and the aesthetic. But to me, I also really enjoy being able to speak to people and say, what gel did you use to do that, or what light did you achieve that with, because it informs me down the line of the equipment to use that I maybe haven't come across before, or how to achieve something.
Absolutely.
No, it's
kind of a
purely
parallel.
talking about process, that's all. That's the way the process can work. It doesn't mean you can't talk to anybody about what you did.
Just to slightly contradict Ian, although I agree with a lot of what you're saying, there is a brand of art criticism, fine art criticism, which does talk about which particular carmine Turner used, and which carmine Canaletto used, and what sort of brushes they used. So there is a thing about that. The reason I'm showing these, and thank you all for your fantastic contribution, the reason I'm showing these is, are these examples of good lighting design, or are they examples of good stage photography?
What are you going to show?
We've been scrolling through them.
I would say, if your light is not good, their photograph will not be good.
Yeah, but I know some pretty good lighting that I've found completely impossible to photograph.
Yes, it's true.
And I also, I'm sorry, but I do know some shit lighting that's photographed up really quite well, especially with a bit of Photoshop. So, what I guess that leads on to, which fortunately we didn't have time to discuss, is how do you judge lighting design, how do you exhibit lighting design, maybe that's a panel another day. But we've run out of time, and so I'd like to thank Yaron, Freman Lee, Scott Palmer. Thank you all for coming, and can you please put your hands together for the time?